The small town of Willow Creek was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, where neighbors greeted each other on the street and the sense of community ran deep. Nestled at the foot of a mountain range and bordered by thick woods, Willow Creek was picturesque, calm, and full of charm. The townspeople prided themselves on the safety and peace of their lives, believing that danger was something far removed from their quiet existence. But one fateful day, everything would change. Mark Evans had been living in Willow Creek for over 10 years. A retired firefighter, he had moved to the town to escape the noise and chaos of city life, hoping for peace and tranquility. He found work as a mechanic in the town's garage and quickly settled into the rhythm of small-town life. It wasn't much, but it was enough for him. He lived alone in a small house just on the outskirts of town with his dog, Duke. Duke was no ordinary dog. A large German shepherd, Duke had been with Mark for almost as long as he could remember. Mark had adopted Duke from a shelter when he was a puppy, and the dog had grown up with him. Over the years, Duke had become more than just a companion. He was Mark's best friend, his confidant, and a constant presence in his life. Loyal, protective, and fiercely intelligent, Duke had always been by Mark's side, whether it was during his firefighting days or now, as he quietly lived out his retirement. But something was about to happen that would test the bond between Mark and Duke, and change the course of their lives forever. It began one autumn morning when Mark took Duke on their usual walk through the woods behind his house. It was a crisp, cool day, the ground covered with a blanket of fallen leaves that crunched beneath their feet. The sun was low in the sky, casting a soft golden light through the trees. It was the perfect morning for a walk, and the two of them wandered deeper into the woods, enjoying the peace of nature. Duke, however, seemed restless. His ears were perked up, and his eyes were scanning the surroundings more intently than usual. Mark, who had grown used to Duke's behavior, thought nothing of it at first. But as they ventured farther into the woods, Duke's unease grew. He began to bark intermittently, his voice sharp and urgent, as though something was off. Mark tried to calm the dog. "It's okay, boy," he said soothingly, but Duke was having none of it. He began to pull on the leash, eager to move forward, as if urging Mark to follow. Mark's instinct told him to turn back, but Duke was insistent. Something was wrong. Suddenly, without warning, Duke broke free from Mark's grasp and dashed deeper into the woods. Mark cursed under his breath, running after him. "Duke, wait up." But the dog was already far ahead. Mark sprinted through the woods, following Duke's barks, his heart pounding with increasing concern. He had never seen the dog so agitated before. As he rounded a bend in the path, he saw Duke standing at the edge of a steep ravine, barking furiously. When Mark reached Duke's side, he froze. Below them, in the ravine, was a woman, her clothes torn, her body bruised, and she was clearly in distress. She was lying motionless, but her hand was raised, reaching out as if pleading for help. "Ma'am!" Mark called out, rushing to the edge. "Are you okay? What happened?" The woman stirred, groaning in pain. "Help me," she whispered weakly. Mark's heart sank as he quickly assessed the situation. The woman had clearly fallen into the ravine. There was no way she could get out on her own. The steep sides made it impossible to climb back up, and the drop was far too dangerous for Mark to attempt to climb down alone. "Duke!" Mark shouted, his voice trembling. The dog had been circling, barking, and looking back at him urgently. It was clear Duke had known something was wrong long before Mark had even reached the ravine. Mark's mind raced. He needed to get the woman out of there, but he had no way of reaching her. The nearest town was miles away, and by the time help arrived, it might be too late. But then, he had an idea. "Duke, stay," Mark said, his voice steady but filled with determination. The dog, sensing the gravity of the situation, immediately stopped his circling and sat obediently by Mark's side. Mark pulled out his phone, dialing 911 with trembling hands. "This is Mark Evans. There's a woman in the ravine behind my house. She's badly injured, and I need help, fast." As Mark spoke with the dispatcher, he kept his eyes on the woman. She was still conscious, but barely. Her breathing was shallow, and she was clutching her side as if in pain. "I'm on my way down to help you," Mark said to the woman, but he knew the only way to safely reach her was to climb down. He glanced at Duke, who was still sitting quietly beside him, watching him closely. Duke, having heard Mark's plan, did something that would change everything. With no warning, the dog sprang into action. He darted down the ravine, navigating the uneven terrain with astonishing agility. Mark's heart raced as he watched the dog disappear down the rocky path. "Duke! Get back here!" Mark yelled, but the dog didn't listen. To Mark's surprise, Duke wasn't just running ahead aimlessly. He was guiding the way. With each step, Duke moved with precision, avoiding the steepest parts of the ravine and finding safe routes down. He barked once, turning back to look at Mark as if to say, "Follow me." Mark hesitated for a moment, unsure of what was happening, but Duke's unspoken communication was enough. Mark followed the dog's trail, carefully navigating the rocks, his feet slipping on the loose ground. The deeper he went, the more he realized that Duke was leading him to the woman, showing him the safest route down. When Mark finally reached the bottom, he found Duke sitting next to the woman, his tail wagging calmly, as though he had done nothing more than lead them to a picnic. Mark was stunned. "Thank you, Duke," Mark whispered, kneeling beside the woman. He checked her vital signs quickly, relieved to see she was still breathing, though she was badly shaken. He looked at Duke, who seemed to know exactly what to do. The dog had been the lifeline, the guide that had led Mark safely through the treacherous ravine. Without him, Mark would have never been able to reach the woman in time. Mark carefully helped the woman to her feet, supporting her weight as they began the slow, painful ascent back to the top of the ravine. Duke stayed close by, walking beside them, occasionally looking up at Mark, making sure they were okay. It was clear the dog wasn't just helping, they were working together as a team. When Mark and the woman finally made it back to the top, the sound of approaching sirens could be heard in the distance. They were met by paramedics, who quickly assessed the woman's injuries. She had broken several ribs and sustained some cuts and bruises, but nothing life-threatening. The paramedics were amazed by how quickly Mark had found and reached her, and even more astounded when they saw Duke sitting proudly by Mark's side. The woman, though in pain, managed a weak smile. "Thank you," she said to Mark and Duke, her voice filled with gratitude. "I didn't think I was going to make it out of there." Mark nodded, looking down at Duke, who wagged his tail. "It wasn't just me," Mark said softly. "It was him, too." The paramedics were quick to recognize Duke's bravery and began to praise the dog for his quick thinking and actions. Word spread quickly through Willow Creek about the incredible rescue, and soon, Duke became more than just Mark's pet. He became a local hero, a symbol of loyalty, courage, and selflessness. In the weeks that followed, the woman, whose name was Lucy, recovered at Mark's home, where she and Duke formed a deep bond. Lucy, a former city dweller who had recently moved to Willow Creek for a quieter life, had wandered too far off the path during a hike and had slipped into the ravine. Thanks to Duke's instincts and Mark's quick thinking, she had survived the ordeal. Mark and Duke's lives had changed that day. They weren't just a man and his dog anymore, they were partners, heroes, and friends who had shared a moment of extraordinary bravery. From that day forward, Mark always knew that Duke was more than just a companion. He was a lifeline, a protector, and a true hero. And he would never take for granted the incredible bond they shared. Duke became a local legend, often remembered for his bravery and intelligence in saving Lucy's life. Mark and Duke's bond grew even stronger, and together, they spent many more years in Willow Creek, always ready to help anyone in need. And every time Mark looked at his loyal companion, he couldn't help but smile, knowing that in the quiet town of Willow Creek, there was one dog who was truly more than just a pet, he was a lifesaver, a hero, and a best friend.